There was a waiting list after her death. Collectors often paid for the sculptures when they were still only lines of code. People never knew exactly what they were getting. They were paying for the next edition of Leftover Fun. And really, we were not selling to many people who planned to keep it for themselves anyway. Not at first. We focused on collectors who would donate their vessel to a museum. We wanted the pieces to be as ubiquitous as Degas' Little Dancer aged 14. When people thought of art, we wanted them to think of Mother. So Mother's usual stable of collectors knew that they needed to donate one piece if they ever wanted to get off of the waiting list, to have their own in the future. 5 years after Mother died, new Merodes had been acquired by the Whitney, the Jago, the Centre Pompidou, the Tate Modern, and the Broad. Somewhat unexpectedly, however, was the new demand from China and the Middle East, two regions that were seeing many more museums built. And where there are new museums, there are galleries that need defining works from around the globe. So it is good to be recognizable and in multiples, like a Warhol Brillo box. But we found that some new collectors from around the world did not appreciate the way that Western galleries conducted their waiting lists, where collectors of lesser renown may never reach the top of those lists, no matter how rich they may be. A Russian oligarch wanted all of 2025. A Saudi prince wanted every winter for the next decade. A wife's birthday was in December. I didn't think much of it. I was glad that there was still so much interest in Mother's continuing work. Even after 5 years, we still primarily worked with the same collectors who Mother had made relationships with throughout her life. Sometimes we took meetings with businessmen whom Mother had never met. They would sit with us and Patrick, obviously believing that Patrick did most of the talking and made the final decisions. These businessmen did not like it when Margaret and I, we were still teenagers, mind you, when we would rattle them with question upon question about their taste and where they saw the works exhibited if they should ever acquire one. Patrick did not like it either, but Patrick did not ask the questions that I knew Mother would care about. It was easy to detect a rat. One man tried to tell us that he wanted to place a Leftover Fun at the Louvre Abu Dhabi. When we asked him what his favorite works at the museum happened to be, however, he couldn't name one past Da Vinci's Salvator Mundi. He didn't even know that the painting was never actually exhibited there. Worse yet, he assumed that we had never visited the museum ourselves and wouldn't catch his lie. We didn't even need to do research on the collectors when their mistakes were so obvious. One afternoon, however, I was reading the Chinese edition of the art newspaper, and I saw that a businessman from Shenzhen had acquired a Leftover Fun at a Hong Kong auction. He had paid a foolish amount for the piece, $5 million, making it not a record price, but one of the more expensive pieces by a woman, particularly for a piece that was not a painting. At the time, we sold the Leftover Funds on the primary market for $1 million each, after having started with $500,000 in 2017. After reading about the auction, I immediately called Patrick. We could only reach his longtime assistant Kelly, though, and she swore that she had no idea how this could have happened. The sculpture had been put up by an anonymous seller. At the time, Margaret and I did not have careers outside of managing Mother's estate, so it was us who followed up with every museum and collector to investigate how this Leftover Fun ended up in a stranger's hands. We had no luck. Then nearly a year later, another leftover fund was auctioned. It would be a second leftover fund that would most likely never be seen again by the public for years or even decades. This time we did not need to call Patrick, because Kelly called us before we even read the news. Through her own investigating, she had found that Patrick, and one of Mother's most beloved collectors, had orchestrated the auctions behind our backs. Kelly told us that she needed to speak up, and she was finally resigning the position of assistant, which I understand she had held for much longer than we'd been alive at that time. Over the phone, I asked, "Are you a gorilla girl?" There was a long pause on the line. I could feel the warmth of her cheeks from across the country. "In spirit," she said. "In spirit." Yes, this little art world backstabbing had become quite the topic of New York high society gossip, hadn't it? Margaret and I fortunately did not pay attention to that. This was our mother's legacy, not gossip to pass the time at dreadful parties. Even when we avoided those, though, friends still asked us about rumors they'd heard about our final meeting with Patrick. Somebody heard he'd pulled a knife. This is more or less how it happened, though. Margaret and I realized that it was inevitable that Mother's works would be auctioned off, particularly when these men were so eager to trade leftover funds as if they were oil futures. So after discussing everything with Vicente, who was the third representative of Mother's estate, we decided that we could do real good with the money brought in at auction if they continued to command such absurd dollar amounts. The spiderwebs could be much more than our college tuition and trips abroad. So Margaret, Vicente, Patrick, and I had our final meeting at the Bowman Gallery. Patrick was obviously unhappy before we even sat in the chairs. After Margaret and I thoroughly explained our decision to Patrick, he tried to be apologetic. He tried to explain himself, but I saw very little need in paying attention to that. The man in the suit suddenly seemed very small. He sounded much more desperate than I'd ever heard him before. He said, "But you'll need somebody to help you shepherd the leftover funds through the entire Christie's process." Margaret said, "We know, and we will be working with Kelly in those matters." Isn't that wonderful? I thought Patrick would explode. He stood up. He was so frustrated. Though he quickly sat back down, perhaps realizing that he began to appear irrational. And then he looked at Vicente, who Patrick may have believed he could cajole something out of. Patrick pointed at Vicente and said, "You." Vicente returned a rather quizzical look, as if to say, "Did you really just address me as you?" Patrick told him, "I could represent you. Do you want a solo show? I can give you a solo show within the year. I will have things rearranged for you." Vicente smiled at Patrick. I believe he tried to stop himself from laughing. And very nonchalantly, Vicente said, "Describe my work." Patrick practically shrieked, "What? What are you asking?" Vicente was very casual. He said, "Tell me about one of my pieces. Any of them. Maybe one that I've told you about." Patrick pretended to be confused. He asked, "What are you getting at, man?" But Vicente would not break his calm. He said, "You really can't, can you?" I thought Patrick might froth at the mouth. His eyes bolted from one of us to the other, and he said, "This is fucking ridiculous. You do that thing with the paint. Come on. This is fucking stupid. Don't be stupid." "Well," Vicente said, still very calm. He said, "Anna Maria and Margaret have made it clear what they'd like done with the future leftover funds. So I believe this marks the end of your representation of the estate of Celia Merode. Patrick yelled, "You're going to let some fucking teenagers decide what happens to these?" My sister said I'm actually 20 now. Patrick couldn't help himself. He said, "Oh, go fuck yourself, Margaret." We were already standing up from our chairs, but now we rushed to the door. Patrick howled, "I didn't mean that!" While we walked through the gallery, we heard something that sounded like a chair being thrown at a wall. I did mean that. Fuck her. Fuck all of them. Post-War and Contemporary Art Evening Sale, 6th of June, 2025. Property from the estate of Celia Merode. Celia Merode, 1965 to 2016. Leftover Fun, number 28. Photos of the lot will be distributed to interested parties once the piece is fully crafted. Lot essay. Exquisitely heralding an ebullient joie de vivre, Celia Merode's Leftover Fun number 28 is a remarkable tribute to the creative vitality and absolute emotive potency of her consummately dynamic oeuvre. A glorious example of her posthumous Leftover Fun series, this magnificent piece's monumental dimensions frankly evoke the immense struggles that the artist crossed swords with on all sides of the metaphorical mountain of the artist's century. Long rumored to be a member of the feminist activist artist group Guerrilla Girls, Merode today not only defies the patriarchy, but death itself. With 3 new pieces fabricated by a 3D printer every year ad infinitum, Leftover Fun will continue for millennia, always becoming contemporary with each new addition to the series. To paraphrase the oft-quoted dictum by Walter Sickert, it will be impossible, henceforth, for those who follow Merode to ever again act as if she had not existed. My shoulders just popped. Did you notice them? Just from thinking about the auctions. Still, after all this time, this is the last time we spoke. It's still happening. That's how you know I'm getting anxious. The shoulder pop. The auctions do it to me every time, dear. We have another tell, I'm afraid. If my husband Harry and I hope to win a piece, we understand we become very quiet. So to hide this, we force ourselves to hold conversations with each other in the coat check line. If anyone listened closely, they'd most likely hear gibberish, possibly invented words, languages. But believe me, dear, if another collector notices that our lips are sealed while waiting in line for our auction paddles, they'll be on to us. Heaven forbid that one of the house's spotters notices this and tells the auctioneer. He'll know that he can drive up the lot's price until he's wrung us dry. Oh yes, of course we feel as if we're helping Celia live forever. My husband tells me he feels as if he's creating life when he buys a Leftover Fun. Yes, like he's giving birth. During a 2-minute auction, he believes that he feels all of the stress of giving birth for 12 hours. Did you just see my shoulders? It probably means that I agree with him. I cannot stand the press boxes at auctions. I am a short person, a full head shorter than most of the other reporters, and it is standing room only behind the press's red velvet rope. Oh, yes, honey. There is a hierarchy, even in the press pit. You see, the major daily newspapers get to stand along that rope, and then the monthlies like my magazine stand behind them. And then the plebes who don't actually go to print are somewhere lost in the back, just reporting on whatever the reporters at the front lines are willing to relay back to them. So, being a person of my stature, I arrive early. On the Merode night, I took a place at the very front. And this ogre from the Financial Times had the nerve to pat me on the head, saying that I'd taken his place. I looked up at him and asked, "Am I blocking your view?" Je suis employé par un habitant très connu du monde de l'art, qui ne sera pas nommé, pour enchérir sur les œuvres qu'il espère acquérir. Même si ce n'est pas mon cash money, j'aime savoir qu'il y avait cette main avec un paillet blanche des dents à la pouvoir de déplacer des milliers, des centaines de milliers de dollars. J'ai dépassé le million une fois alors que je n'étais pas censé le faire. Mais l'homme a été convaincu après avoir débaillé la pièce dans sa maison de ville. Je ne pouvais pas le laisser perdre cette œuvre d'art. Et avec les Merode, disons qu'il savait que ça coûterait facilement plus d'1 million. Il peut-être au non quelque chose à voir avec le dernier exemplaire vendu à tant de mois par la vente à Hong Kong. Il était donc prêt à me donner tout ce dont j'avais besoin. Jusqu'à un certain point. I worked the phone bank for our remote buyers that night. A dozen of us stood in the box to the left of the live audience. Many of us are polyglots: Cantonese, Russian, Arabic, Mandarin. The languages that money speaks, really. Yes, just before the Merode lot was put up, I was on the phone with a Saudi prince. It was my responsibility to excitedly convey the energy of the room to him, and this in turn, with my many hand gestures during a competitive lot, can amplify the energy of the room itself. And that cycle of excitement flows directly back to my bidder, of course. Though I do wonder if they are always paying attention. During one auction, my phone bidder almost certainly had sex with a woman while I spoke to him. I must say, it was easier than usual to get a yes for a higher bid. When I enter the sales room on post-war and contemporary nights, the seats are already filled to capacity, 1,000 people, standing room only in the back, and those are gawkers, oftentimes tourists. I do not look at those people. There are seats directly in front of them, very far from the front row, but these rarely produce winning bids. As the seats get closer to me, the higher the status enjoyed by the person sitting in them. The aisle seats are the most exclusive, particularly to the right, where you'll find the high-profile collectors who are most likely to bid. When I step up to the lectern, the press gallery is to my left. The phones operated by the Christie's team are to my right. Behind my left shoulder is a tall digital board that displays the bids converted into US dollars, euros, British pounds, Swiss francs, Japanese yen, Russian rubles, and Hong Kong dollars. Behind my right shoulder is a screen that depicts the lot up for auction for those who are sitting too far away to see the actual work on display. The audience begins to quiet as I raise my gavel. Sitting on my podium, one of my assistants will have placed my auction book. This book has been meticulously researched. One page is my map of the audience, denoting who is likely to bid, and which lot they are most interested in. Each lot has its own page. On the Merode page, I had information on the Merode Estate's reserve price that we must reach in order for them to sell. Then a number of bids by collectors and museums who did not send representatives, and the names of our most likely bidders, which we knew more or less because they had inquired about the piece's condition report prior to the auction. Silly in a way, because the piece had been made by a 3D printer only 1 week before. We watched the Christie's employees in white gloves carry out the first painting. No, we weren't particularly interested in it. It was a perfectly fine Jenny Saville of a grotesquely obese nude. The auctioneer started the bidding at $38,000, and before he could finish saying the number, a white paddle shot up, and he didn't pause before saying $42,000. The room has so much energy, and when Harry and I are not bidding, I prefer to be sitting next to someone who cannot control that energy. And for better or worse, I felt more of that spirit and vigor vibrating beside me that night than any other auction I had attended before. The young woman next to me was fidgeting around so much that I thought she might fall out of her chair. And when I turned to look at her, I was surprised to see that she was wearing a hooded sweatshirt, as if she was attending a basketball game or some such. I was even more surprised to see that she couldn't have been more than 20 years old. I thought that a collector may have sent his daughter to place his bids, or the family's au pair even. It wasn't a particularly nice sweatshirt, no. I was happy, however, to see that somebody finally had a worse tell than Harry and I. C'est du capitalisme pur. Je l'aime. Parfois, même lorsque le client n'est pas intéressé par une pièce, je lève la paille au milieu d'une guerre d'enchères entre deux personnes. Histoire de le faire dépenser plus. Le premier lot s'est terminé à $240,000 après environ 3 minutes. $240K. Ce n'est pas un mauvais prix pour un gros move sur toi. Arlington a présenté les lots 2, puis les lots 3, 4. Après 5 ou 6 de ces choses, il y a une accalmie dans la foule. L'énergie n'est pas tout à fait là. Donc, ils ajoutent généralement quelque chose de grand qui donnera toute la pièce son, comment dites-vous, money boner? As soon as Lot 6 was gavelled off, I took the prince's line off hold, told his secretary that we'd begin the Merode in the next minute, and she transferred me directly to him. I looked up at the screen to see the slide switch over to the Merode. The sculpture looked like a very large mason jar, an opaque clay mason jar. Unlike protocol for smaller pieces, the vessel was not wheeled into the sales room due to its size. The young lady next to me stared up at the image of Celia's leftover fun and said, "Why aren't they bringing it out? Where is the real thing? Why aren't they bringing it out?" I turned to her. She wasn't asking me, only the air. I tried to be polite and asked, "Is it your first time at the auction, dear?" But she turned to me and said, she said, "What the fuck?" I announced Lot 7, the Celia Merode Leftover Fund number 28 of 2025. Little more than that. The audience knows what they are bidding on. They have read the catalog. Interested bidders have researched the condition report. So we were off. When the prince picked up the line, we briefly chatted. He told me that I sounded pretty. He asked me if I was pretty. Yes, I said, because I am, but also because I thought it might help raise his bid. I said I'm going to start the bidding off at $500,000. $500,000, $500,000, $550,000, at $550,000. Even up front, I could barely see anything in there. I asked, who is bidding? And that muskox from the Financial Times laughed at me. And he asked me if he could use my head to jot down notes in his pad. I was gaping up at his idiotic chin when the auctioneer announced $600,000. So I still missed who was bidding. Harry and I held still while the auctioneer rattled off $600,000, $700,000. Yes, we may want Celia to live forever, but we don't want a bidding war within the first minute. And next to me, I felt this girl absolutely trembling. I saw her paddle hand flinch after every number. She pulled that silly hood over her head. It made my shoulders pop. I looked up at the auctioneer to see if he saw. And of course, he saw everything. Oh, Bernadette, I knew she wanted in. I looked her in the eyes and asked, do we have 850? The girl turned to me and asked again, are they really not bringing it out? Beaucoup de paillements. Personne n'était hors du jeton. Alors j'ai roulé à la vapeur ces salauds avec ma paillette en l'air. Il était temps de lui montrer qui avait la plus grosse bite de la pièce. Après avoir dit 950, il m'a regardé comme si j'allais baisser le bras. Tesla, il sait pour qui je travaille. When $1 million was announced, this girl next to me practically burst out of her hood and leaped out of her chair with the paddle. I was surprised to see her actually bid, to say the least. When that girl put it over 1 million, I didn't take it seriously. She certainly wasn't in my map of the audience. I told him the prices. He was angry that they were still so low. He said, I'm giving the phone to my caddy so that I can take my swing. When this is worth my time, tell them that I am bidding. I tried asking, what is worth your time? But the caddy already held the phone. He said, hello, you're in the Big Apple? What is the weather like there? 1,000,001, 1,000,002, 1,000,003, 1,000,003. I didn't like this girl next to me anymore. The Sims do not compete with children in sweatshirts. But at the same time, the auctioneer kept glancing at me from the podium, wondering when we'd bid. He knew we would. I couldn't hold us off anymore. I tapped the edge of Harry's foot with my toe, and he dutifully raised our paddle. As if we were the only people in the room, the auctioneer then said, thank you, madam. 3,000,005. It's funny how he just knew that I was in charge. That prick bidding for Bowman finally put his hand down when they reached 3 million. He didn't scare anyone away. Okay, oui, j'ai arrêté de la rouler à la vapeur. Je ne pouvais secouer personne de ma jambe. Tout ce que j'ai fait, c'est inciter un enfant que je n'avais jamais vu auparavant à commencer à enchérir. Je pensais que je pourrais envoyer tout le monde par-dessous cette foutue falaise. Bien sûr, un O'Keefe s'est vendu pour 44 millions de dollars, un bourgeois de 28, mais ce sont des valeurs aberrantes. Une poignée de tableaux de puissance se sont vendus entre 5 et 10 millions. Mais j'ai été choqué quand le commissaire Pazul est devenu élégant et est passé directement à 5 million. 5,000,005, 5,000,005. 6 million? 6 million? 6 million? We have 6 million. 6 million 5? Fortunately, the momentum slowed a tad. I think that the collectors who expected it to sell for the Chinese auction's price stepped out once we'd topped it. Unfortunately, the bidding pool narrowed dramatically. The auctioneer could focus on the few of us who remained. I nudged Harry's foot to meet 6.5 million. I looked around to see if the buyer for Patrick Bowman would bid again. That scoundrel. Both of them, really. It's truly funny how Marcel believes that people don't know who he works for. Marcel brags about it. He is a complete bore. Nobody has better art world gossip, though, so I can stomach him for a drink or two every now and again. Now, I'll tell you this because it's basically an open secret in the art world, and you probably already know, but Marcel is actually how I broke the story that Bowman went against her wishes. Practically the minute she died, by selling that piece in Hong Kong to somebody who had no intention of ever exhibiting it in public. It was lost to a private collection just a week after being made. And this whole time that I'm watching this girl, figuring out her little tics, the auctioneer was every so often glancing at Harry and me, obviously wondering how much he could wring out of us. And the whole audience was watching him, hoping he'd goad another 7 million. 7 million 5? This was getting exciting. Nobody had ever sold a week-old piece for so much money. It was absolutely unheard of. The museum representatives stopped putting up their paddles after a few million. Once you get to these heights, though, the collectors are scared to look down and see. For Christ's sake, this thing was made by a robot a week earlier. These collectors are just trying to make a statement now. It's not even about the art. They're just trying to prove. I held Harry's paddle against his thigh because I worried that the auctioneer would keep driving us up. And then one of the phone reps frantically waved her hand. I shouted, "We have a bid!" I didn't know if we really had a bid. I had been talking to this caddy for a minute when I realized that we fast approached 10 million, and I assumed that this was worth the prince's time. My heart raced. I hoped against hope that we really did have a bid. 9 million. 9 million. This was really something because only half a dozen women had ever sold over 10 million. I wanted to shout, "Who is that girl? She just put it over 10 million. Some little spastic girl with adult acne. She wore a hoodie." I turned to the ogre and he just shrugged his Frankenstein shoulders. Everyone in the press. I took the paddle out of Harry's hand, and he looked at me as if I'd just taken the keys to his Aston Martin. But I sat on it. No, really. I slid it under my backside and forgot about it. We had helped Celia continue life. We might not have owned that particular leftover fund, but we knew she... Thankfully, the prince said yes. Now that we were in the double digits, he said, "Okay. Now I'll stay on the line with you." I told him that it appeared to be down to him and j'avais peur de remonter ce palier. Nous avions largement dépassé ce que la Cléon avait. 12 million. That young woman who wasn't even in my seating map had just made the 28th leftover fund the third most expensive artwork made by a woman. I still wasn't sure if I should take her bid seriously. So I turned to Mrs. Sims next to her and asked, 12 million 5? Madam, do we have 12 million 5? She shook her head no. Sadly, I knew she was at her. The oddest thing, I turned to the girl and saw a wooden handle slide out of her sweatshirt's pocket. We got 12.13? Who is this girl? It was a hammer of all things. The prince said 13? Yes, it's nothing. In her hand, j'avais fini. Il m'éterait. She raised it in the air like she was a Norwegian god. This is mad! Like it was an auction paddle. I thought it was a paddle. So I said 13 million 5. She stood. I looked at Georgina, hoping we had one more bid on the phone. She threw the hammer at the screen with the picture of Celia's piece. I thought the audience was gasping at the bid.
When I turned back to the mall, though, I was surprised to see this girl standing up. She was practically panting.
The hammer made a dull thump against the photo. It didn't even tear a hole. It just hit the screen and dropped to the floor like a dead bird.
I said, fair warning, I'm selling at $14 million. Fair warning. It's not yours, it's on the phone.
When the girl screamed, "Free Celia Merode!" the auctioneer just gaped at her, as if he was watching a walrus eat its young. L'équipe de Christie's portait toujours d'un gant blanc lorsqu'elle l'a escorté hors de là. The prince said, "What's happening now? Have I won yet?" I didn't know. I was waiting for Charles to hit the gavel. After she was led out, the auctioneer brushed the commotion aside, as if somebody had only coughed too loudly. I truly don't think he knew what had happened. He said, "All right, well, we're selling the Merode for $14 million to the bidder on the phone." He rapped his gavel, and without a second thought, we were on to the next lot. We had no idea where that leftover fund might land in the world. I barely even heard any applause. No, I never did get my hammer back.